Time to move on to our next problem. I'm going to find the reverse int folder inside my project. I'm going to open up the folder and open up the index.js file. Now before we forget, we'll also start the new test file for this project as well. So back at my terminal, I'll stop the running test runner by pressing Ctrl+C, and then I'll start up the new set of tests by running jest reverse int / test.js -- watch, like so. Okay, so we should see about 4 tests or so running. All right, so back over to our code editor. Let's look at the description for this problem. Now, before we talk about the problem itself, I want to say that this is going to be another very similar reversing type problem, but this one has a couple extra challenges stacked on top of it. This problem right here is a fantastic example of how understanding and really succeeding at interview questions is all about practice and practicing more in different types of questions. Because at first glance, this is kind of a tricky problem. However, if you understand the 1 or 2 little tricks behind it, and there are distinct little tricks here, if you understand the tricks, then this turns into an extraordinarily straightforward question. So there is a very straightforward solution to this, but it's all about understanding that little trick. So if you want to give this problem a try on your own, then go ahead and pause the video right now, read the directions and take a look at the examples and give it a shot. Otherwise, stick around. We're going to look at the problem. And we're going to talk about some of the little tricks that you should understand to really effectively solve this. And personally, I recommend you stick around and listen to these tricks. Otherwise, this problem is just kind of a nightmare to deal with. All right, so first let's look at the directions and the examples. Again, we are reversing some type of data entry here. In this case, it is an integer. So if I pass in an integer of 15, I should see the numbers in there get reversed to 51. 981 would go to 189. If the number ends with zeros, then when we flip it, those zeros should disappear. So 500 should not be 005, it should be just 5. And then the other interesting thing is handling negative numbers as well. So negative 15 should become negative 51. And if we kind of take this issue with the zeros together with the negatives, negative 90 should turn into simply negative 9. Now, one thing I want to make sure is really clear here, even though we're in a section of this course where I said we're all talking about strings and whatnot, both the input and the output should be numbers. So if we want to kind of apply the same kind of string reversal stuff that we've been doing, that's fine. But the end result of what we're doing should produce a number, not a string. Just want to make sure that's really clear. Okay, so let's now talk about some of the little gotchas here, or some of the things that make this problem really easy. So first off, you and I know at this point how to reverse a string very well. We've seen 2 problems already, each of them with multiple solutions on how to reverse a string. However, we've been talking about reversing strings, not numbers. We can turn a number into a string, however, by using a function called toString. So let's take a look at my little code editor here and we'll practice this out really quick. Now, on the left-hand side, I'm going to write some code and we'll see the result of that code appear on the right-hand side. So just as a quick example, let me show you maybe const my number equals 200. If I want to turn this number, this integer right here, into a string, I can call my number dot toString. And that returns a string 200. So at that point, I can then use familiar functions like, say, split, and turn it into an array of strings. I can join it back together to form another string, and so on. So by using this toString function right here, we can turn our number into a string and then work on it as though it was a string and take care of it with all the usual reversal techniques that we've looked at so far. So that's kind of trick number 1. Trick number 2 that I want you to be aware of is a little function built into the math library that is included with JavaScript. So I've got the documentation for it in a new tab right here. I'm at the Mozilla Developer Network looking at the documentation for math.sign. So I'm not going to tell you exactly where to use this in this problem, but I'm just going to point this function out. With this math.sign function, we can pass in a number. If that number is positive, math.sign will return 1. Otherwise, if the number that we pass in is negative, then it will return -1. So for example, math.sine of 4,000 will return 1. Math.sine of -4,000 returns -1. So I just want you to be aware of this little helper function because I think that it might be really helpful in solving the issue with maintaining the sign here on the actual number. Now the last thing I want to tell you about, the last little trick, remember how we were just talking about, well, you can turn a number into a string by using toString. So let's say we have 400 again. Just to make sure it's really clear, once we call toString on this thing, if we then split it into an array and join it back together, we're still dealing with a number, or excuse me, we're still dealing with a string. In order to turn all this stuff back into an actual number, which is exactly what we're really trying to do here, you can use the parseInt function. So parseInt, like so. So parseInt takes a string and it returns a number, or at least what it thinks is a number inside that string. And then once it's been turned back into a number, we can then add something to it, like add 2,000 or divide by 2,000 or whatever we want to do. So clearly after calling parseInt, we are now dealing with a number here. Okay, so that's the three little tricks: parseInt, toString, and math.sine. Between those, I think that you've got the tools to kind of take the reversing of string technique that we've been looking at and apply it to this new problem that we are working on. So at this point, I encourage you to pause the video, take a shot at the solution, and we will go over the solution in the next section. So I'll see you in just a minute.